Hey everyone, it's Mallory here with cats.com, and in this week's video we're diving into the facts about tabby cats. So first off, what is a tabby cat? I'll sometimes hear people using the term tabby to kind of refer to any kind of domestic, non-purebred cat you see on the street, sometimes specifically female cats of this kind. But the term tabby refers to a particular type of coat pattern. So this coat pattern has a few different varieties, which I'll get into in a minute, but it is generally defined as being this kind of multicolored pattern of stripes, swirls, bands, and spots that tend to manifest in these specific patterns across the body. So again, there are a few different types of tabby coats. So the first is called mackerel. It's inspired by its resemblance to the bones of a mackerel fish, or really any kind of fish skeleton. And it is defined by these vertical stripes coming up the cat's flanks. So you'll notice that the sides have these pretty consistent stripes coming up them. The second type of tabby coat is called the classic tabby coat. Perhaps one of the better representations of this is in the American Shorthair. You'll see these very defined thick bands and swirls of that darker coat color. The third type of tabby coat is called a spotted coat, so it looks sort of like the mackerel stripes have been broken up into these little spots, and they will be organized in a similar pattern along the sides of the cat's body. And then the fourth type of tabby coat might not initially strike you as a tabby at all, and it's called a ticked tabby. So all tabby cats have the agouti gene, which causes their fur to have different colors on each strand of hair. So if you look closely at a tabby cat's coat, you'll notice that the strands have multiple colors on them. The way that tabby cats get their stripes and markings is by variation in the different colors on each strand. So the darker parts that are at the top will form the markings of the cat. And while other types of tabbies get these markings from variation in the way the colors are located on each strand, a tick tabby has an even agouti coat, which means that the colors on each strand are pretty much the same all across their body. Ticked tabbies will usually have some stripes on their face, on their neck, and on their tails, but for the most part they have a very even agouti look to them. In addition to the four main types of tabbies, there's a fifth kind of informal grouping, which is called the patch tabby. And this is when you have a cat that's either a tortoiseshell or a calico, and they're also a tabby. So these cats will have orange, black, and sometimes white fur, and it will also incorporate a tabby pattern. So these are referred to as either torbies if they're tortoiseshell, or as calabies if they have white markings as well. Now, regardless of what kind of tabby you have, all of them are going to have this distinctive kind of M on their forehead. So if you look, you'll notice that they have these stripes that kind of form into the shape of an M right there on the forehead. It can be kind of faint, it can be really distinct. Now, we don't know exactly why the fur forms into this pattern on the forehead, but it has given rise to a number of different myths and legends, varying by culture, as to why cats developed this distinctive M on their foreheads. Now, tabby is the most common coat pattern out there, and for good reason. It is the coat pattern that they inherited from their ancestors. So if you look at the African wildcat, they will exhibit a tabby coat. And this is for good reason. A tabby coat offers good camouflage in your cat's ancestors' natural habitat, and compared to, say, a solid black or a solid white coat, or black with little white socks, it offers a lot more protection to that cat. Again, while the average tabby cat is just going to be a non-purebred domesticated cat, you can also see this pattern in pretty much every breed out there. So we kind of know why cats tend to be tabbies. It makes sense for camouflage, but how does a tabby coat develop in a cat genetically? It all begins with that agouti gene. Again, the agouti gene causes the cat to develop a coat that consists of different colored hairs. The hairs will have different tip colors ranging from dark to light, and those darker tipped hair bands are going to form the markings on the cat's body. Now, there are other genes that can come in to make a cat not tabby, but generally the tabby gene is dominant. So it's more likely that you're going to have a tabby coat than a solid coat, and it's more likely that you'll have a tabby coat than a solid patched coat with white spots. So there are a lot of different genetic factors that come into play, and a lot of modifier genes that can change exactly how that tabby coat forms. But again, it all comes down to that agouti gene. So researchers looked at kitten embryos between 25 and 28 days old, and they could tell that even at this early stage, the embryos were starting to develop patterns in their skin that would later give way to the patterns of their coat. So these patterns of thicker and thinner skin would eventually start giving way to different expressions of genes and cells that would eventually lead to the coat pattern that they would develop as adults. And so basically the body already knows what kind of pattern the cat is going to have as an adult at a very, very early stage of development. Remember that if there's an area on the cat's body that's going to have that darker coat color, it's going to have that for their whole life. So the kitten starts out really, really small and then they get bigger. Those cells still know that they're supposed to produce that darker pigmented fur. My next fact is that some solid looking cats are secretly tabbies. So the gene that causes a cat to be a tabby is dominant over the solid gene, so it's more likely that a cat will be tabby than solid, even if they're, say, a black cat. So while black cats always look solid at first glance, if you look at them in the sunlight really, really closely, you'll probably notice that they have some tabby patterning. Another interesting fact is that all orange cats are tabbies. So the gene that causes a cat to become orange also suppresses the gene that would cause them to be solid or repress the agouti gene. So all orange cats have the agouti gene. They are all tabbies. Again, sometimes they can kind of look like they're not tabbies, but generally this is because they have very subtle patterning and maybe a ticked tabby coat. And so it's harder to make out those patterns, but look really closely and you'll probably see that very subtle M on their forehead. And my last fact relates not directly to our cat's coats, but to the origin of the word tabby. The origins of the word seem to date all the way back to medieval Baghdad. There was a certain quarter of the city known for textile manufacturing, and it was called Al-Atabi, and there was a specific type of cloth that was named after this area and referred to as Atabi. Now, it's hard to know exactly what kind of cloth this was originally. Writers describe it in a few different ways, but it seems like it was kind of a striped cloth. Eventually, it moved through various languages, and by the late 1600s, we were seeing English references to it as both a kind of watered silk and cats with a similar coat type. So a coat type that resembled this particular type of silk. So that's about it for my facts about tabby cats. I hope you learned something new. Let me know in the comments what kind of tabby coat your cat has, and I look forward to seeing your tabby cat stories and insights in the comments. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.